Marcus DeLuca had spent 22 years learning how to break things. Bones, mostly. Sometimes jaws, occasionally ribs, and on one memorable Tuesday night in Bangkok, a man's orbital socket that required 3 surgeries to properly reconstruct. He was 43 years old, held a 6th-degree black belt in Tae Kwon Do, a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and had accumulated enough trophies and plaques throughout his career that his mother had stopped displaying them in her living room simply because there was no more wall space remaining. The martial arts school he owned in a strip mall outside Cleveland had produced 3 national champions, 2 world medalists, and 1 young woman who had gone on to work private security for people whose names appeared in financial newspapers rather than sports pages. Marcus taught discipline, and he taught control. He taught his students that the greatest victory was the fight that never happened at all. He believed every word of this instruction with his entire chest, and he meant it sincerely every time he said it. But Marcus had a problem that none of his students knew about, that his ex-wife knew about intimately, and that his mother suspected but never mentioned during their Sunday phone calls. The problem was simple. Marcus had never truly been tested. Not really. Not in a way that mattered when the lights went out and the cheering stopped. His competitive career had been decorated, certainly. He had stepped onto mats in 17 countries and walked off with medals around his neck in most of them. But tournament fighting, even at the highest levels, operated within rules, boundaries. There's referees who stepped between combatants when things became too intense. Opponents who shook your hand afterward and meant it. Marcus had never fought anyone who genuinely wanted to destroy him, who would have been satisfied with nothing less than his complete and total annihilation. This absence of true testing had created something unexpected inside him. It had created curiosity. And curiosity, when left to ferment for 2 decades inside a disciplined mind, eventually transforms into something else entirely. It transforms into need. The trip to London had been his sister's idea. She had called him on a Tuesday evening, her voice bright with the particular enthusiasm that only real estate agents on commission seemed to possess. "You're 50 next year," she had said, as if this were news to him. "Ma, you should see something besides the inside of that gym. Come to London with me. I have a conference. You can do the tourist thing. Walk around. See some history." Marcus had agreed because he could not think of a reason to refuse. He had students who could cover his classes. He had savings that could cover the flight. He had an ex-wife who would not miss him, and a mother who would pray for his safe travels regardless of where he went. So he packed a small bag, boarded a large plane, and allowed himself to be transported across an ocean to a city he had only ever seen in movies. London in November was exactly as gray and damp as everyone had warned him it would be. He spent his first 2 days doing exactly what his sister had suggested. He looked at things. He walked places. He ate food that cost too much and tasted fine. He stood outside buildings that had existed for centuries and tried to feel something resembling connection to the past. He felt mostly cold and slightly hungry, which he supposed was its own kind of historical experience. On the 3rd day, his sister had her conference. Marcus had Buckingham Palace. He arrived at the palace in the late morning when the crowd was thick but not yet unbearable. Tourists from everywhere pressed against barriers and each other, holding cameras at angles that defied basic physics. Children sat on shoulders. Elderly couples consulted maps. A group of teenagers spoke in a language Marcus could not identify and laughed at something on someone's phone. It was exactly the sort of environment Marcus typically avoided. Too many variables, too many unpredictable elements, too many people who moved without awareness of the space around them. But the palace itself held his attention. The architecture, the history, the sheer weight of tradition that seemed to press down from the stone itself. Marcus found himself moving closer to the iron gates, studying the faces of the guards who stood motionless in their iconic uniforms. Bearskin hats, red coats, black trousers, faces that revealed absolutely nothing. He had seen these guards in photographs his entire life. They were symbols, really. Postcard images, things you bought on keychains and refrigerator magnets. But standing here, watching them in person, Marcus felt something shift in his perception. These were real men, real soldiers, and real human beings standing completely still while hundreds of people screamed and waved and tried desperately to make them laugh or flinch or move in any way whatsoever. The guards did none of these things. They stood. They breathed. They stared straight ahead at nothing and everything simultaneously. Marcus watched one guard for nearly 20 minutes. The man was young, maybe mid-20s, with the kind of face that could have been handsome if it weren't so completely expressionless. His eyes never moved. His hands never twitched. His chest rose and fell with the slow rhythm of controlled breathing, but otherwise he might have been a statue placed there by some particularly committed city planner. Something about this unnerved Marcus. He was accustomed to reading people. It was essential to his profession. Fighters telegraphed their intentions in 1,000 tiny ways. The shift of weight, the flicker of eyes, the tension in shoulders just before a strike. Marcus had built his entire competitive career on reading these signals faster than his opponents could send them. This guard sent nothing. Absolutely nothing. He was a void in human form. A group of American tourists approached the guard, laughing and pointing. One of them, a man in his 50s wearing a baseball cap and a jacket from a university Marcus had never heard of, stepped close to the guard and waved a hand in front of his face. "Hello in there," the man said loudly. "Anybody home?" The guard did not respond, did not blink, did not acknowledge in any way that a human being was speaking directly to his face. The tourists laughed harder. Someone took a photograph. And the man in the baseball cap stepped even closer, close enough that Marcus could see the guard had a small scar on his chin, close enough that their jackets nearly touched. "Come on, mate," the man said, affecting a terrible British accent. "Give us a smile. Just a little one." Nothing. The guard continued to stare straight ahead. Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. He could not name the feeling. Irritation, perhaps, or admiration, or something more complicated that he did not want to examine too closely. This guard possessed a level of discipline that Marcus had spent his entire career trying to instill in his students. Complete control, total mastery of self, the ability to remain absolutely still and absolutely present while the world threw itself at your face. The tourists eventually grew bored and moved on, searching for their next entertainment. The guard remained exactly as he had been. Marcus remained exactly where he was, watching, wondering, feeling that tightness in his chest grow into something that demanded attention. He approached the guard, not aggressively, not with any plan or purpose that he could articulate to himself. He simply walked closer, stopping at the same distance the tourist had occupied, close enough to see the guard's eyelashes, close enough to smell the wool of his uniform, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from another human body in the cold November air. "You're very good at that," Marcus said quietly. Not loud enough for anyone else to hear. Just a private observation shared between two men standing very close together in a crowd of thousands. The guard did not respond. Of course he didn't. And that was the entire point. Marcus studied his face. Young, yes, but with something in the eyes that suggested he had seen things. The way soldiers look when they have been places where discipline meant the difference between breathing and not breathing. This was not a man playing dress-up for tourists. This was a man who had chosen a path of service and had committed himself completely to its demands. "I've spent my whole life teaching people to control themselves," Marcus continued, still quiet, still private. "But I've never seen anything like this. Never." The guard's eyes remained fixed on the middle distance. His breathing continued its slow rhythm. He gave no indication that he had heard anything at all. Marcus felt that tightness in his chest again. But now it had a name. It was inadequacy. It was the sudden, a crushing realization that everything he had accomplished, everything he had built, everything he had believed about himself and his discipline was somehow smaller than this young man's simple act of standing still. He wanted to prove something. He wanted to demonstrate that he too possessed power, control, the ability to affect the world around him. He wanted in that moment to remind himself that he was not just another tourist with a camera and a credit card. He was Marcus DeLuca. He was somebody. So he did something he would spend the rest of his life trying to understand. He struck the guard in the face. It was not a full-power strike. Marcus had too much training, too many years of muscle memory to accidentally kill someone in front of Buckingham Palace. It was a tap, really. And an open-handed slap delivered with perhaps 10% of the force he could have generated. But it connected, palm against cheek, skin against skin. The sound was not loud, but in the space between them, it might as well have been an explosion. The guard's head did not move. His expression did not change. His eyes did not blink. But something happened. Something that Marcus, with all his years of training, all his hours of reading opponents, all his carefully developed instincts, could not quite process. The guard's eyes shifted, just slightly, just enough to meet Marcus's gaze directly. And Marcus saw something in those eyes that stopped his heart. It was not anger. It was not fear. It was not surprise or confusion or any of the reactions he had expected had unconsciously prepared for. They had been ready to counter with his decades of martial arts training. It was patience, absolute, complete, terrifying patience. The patience of a man who knew exactly what he was doing, exactly what his job required, and exactly what would happen next. The patience of someone who had already won a fight that Marcus did not even realize had begun. Part 2. The world did not end. This was Marcus's first coherent thought in the seconds following his inexplicable action. The sky did not fall. The ground did not open. No alarms sounded. No swarm of tactical response units descended upon him from hidden positions throughout the palace grounds. The tourists continued their conversations, their photographing, their oblivious enjoyment of a Tuesday morning in London. The guard continued to stand exactly where he had been standing. His face now marked by the faint red impression of Marcus's fingers, his eyes still fixed on that middle distance, his breathing unchanged. But Marcus knew. He knew that something fundamental had shifted in the universe. He had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. He had done something that could not be undone. He stepped backward. 1 step. 2. His body moving on instinct while his mind raced to catch up with what had just occurred. 3 steps. 4. He was retreating now, melting back into the crowd of tourists who had no idea what they had just witnessed. No idea that a man had just assaulted a member of the King's Guard in broad daylight in front of hundreds of witnesses. The guard did not move, did not pursue, did not call out or signal or do any of the things Marcus's training told him a person should do after being struck. He simply continued to stand, continued to guard, continued to perform his duty with the same absolute focus he had displayed before Marcus had lost his mind for approximately 7 seconds. Marcus reached a bench approximately 50 yards from the guard's position and sat down heavily. His legs felt strange, unreliable. He placed his hands on his knees and forced himself to breathe the way he taught his students to breathe when panic threatened to overwhelm technique. In through the nose for 4 counts. Hold for 4. Out through the mouth for 4. In, hold, out. His mind replayed the moment on a continuous loop. His hand rising, his palm connecting, the sound, the eyes, those eyes. He had expected many things. He had expected the guard to break position, to react with the outrage any normal person would feel upon being struck without provocation. He had expected other guards to intervene, to seize him, to hold him for authorities who would arrive with questions and handcuffs and a permanent record of his complete and total loss of sanity. He had expected, at minimum, some acknowledgement that something had happened, that the universe had been disrupted, that cause had produced effect. Instead, he had received nothing. Nothing except those eyes. Those patient, knowing, terrifying eyes. Marcus sat on that bench for nearly an hour. He watched the guard. The guard did not watch him. The guard continued his duty as if Marcus had never existed, as if the slap had never happened, and as if the entire incident had been a hallucination brought on by jet lag and existential crisis. Tourists continued to approach, to wave, to photograph, to attempt their amateur efforts at provoking a reaction. The guard ignored them all with the same complete indifference. And slowly, terribly, Marcus began to understand. The guard's reaction, or lack thereof, was not weakness. It was not passivity. It was not the response of someone who had been trained to endure abuse without complaint. It was something far more formidable. It was the response of someone who operated within a system so vast, so powerful, so completely certain of its own authority that individual incidents simply did not matter. The guard did not need to react because the system would react for him. And the guard did not need to pursue because there was nowhere Marcus could go that the system could not find him. The guard's patience was not the patience of submission. It was the patience of absolute, unchallengeable power. Marcus had spent his entire life studying power. He had learned to generate it from his hips, to focus it through his fists, to project it through his presence. He had believed that power was personal, individual, something that resided in the body and could be deployed at will. He had been wrong. The guard had just demonstrated a different kind of power entirely, the power of belonging to something larger than yourself. The power of knowing that your role, however small, was part of something that had existed for centuries and would continue to exist for centuries more. The power of patience. He should leave, Marcus thought. He should stand up, walk away, find his sister, pretend this had never happened. He should return to Cleveland, to his gym, to his students, to his life. He should never speak of this to anyone. He should carry this moment to his grave and hope that the universe, in its infinite patience, eventually forgot what he had done. But he could not move. His legs would not cooperate. His mind would not release its grip on those eyes. That patience, that terrible knowledge that he had just done something that could not be taken back. A hand touched his shoulder. Marcus spun, his body responding with the speed that had made him a champion, his fists rising before his brain had fully processed what was happening. He stopped himself inches from striking a woman in her 60s who had recoiled in surprise, or her hand pressed to her chest, her eyes wide with alarm. "I'm sorry," Marcus said immediately, lowering his hands. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. You startled me." The woman studied him for a long moment. She was elegantly dressed, the kind of woman who had probably been beautiful in her youth and had aged into something equally striking. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and currently filled with concern. "Are you all right?" she asked. Her accent was British, upper class, the kind that made Marcus feel like he should stand up straighter and speak more carefully. "You've been sitting here for quite some time. You look rather pale." Marcus forced a smile. "Jet lag," he said. "Long flight. Haven't quite adjusted." The woman did not look convinced. She sat down on the bench beside him, maintaining a respectful distance, but making it clear she was not going anywhere. "I've lived in London my entire life," she said. "I know what jet lag looks like. This isn't jet lag." Marcus said nothing. He could not think of anything to say that would not sound like a lie, primarily because anything he said would be a lie. "I also know what someone looks like when they've done something they regret," the woman continued, her voice gentle. "And I know what someone looks like when they're waiting for the consequences to arrive." Marcus turned to look at her fully. There was no judgment in her face, no accusation, just the calm attention of someone who had seen many things in her 6 decades and had learned to recognize the signs of human distress. "I did something stupid," Marcus said. The words came out before he could stop them. Really stupid. The kind of stupid that could ruin my entire life." The woman nodded slowly. "Did you hurt someone?" Marcus hesitated. Then, because there was something in her face that invited honesty, he nodded. "Did you mean to?" Another hesitation, another nod. "I don't know why I did it. That's the worst part. I wanted to prove something. To myself, I think. And now I don't even know what I was trying to prove." The woman was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft. "When my husband was alive, he used to say that the hardest thing in the world is not controlling others. It's controlling yourself. He was a diplomat. Spent 40 years negotiating with people who wanted to kill each other. And he always said that the most dangerous opponents he ever faced were the ones who had learned to be patient." Marcus thought of the guard's eyes. Those patient, waiting eyes. "Your husband sounds like he was a wise man." "He was," the woman said. "He also made plenty of mistakes. We both did. The trick, he used to say, is not avoiding mistakes altogether. That's impossible. The trick is learning to sit with them afterward, to understand what they tell you about yourself." She stood, smoothing her skirt with practiced hands. She looked down at Marcus with an expression he could not quite read. "Whatever you did," she said, "you're still sitting here. You haven't run. You haven't hidden. You're waiting. That counts for something." She walked away before Marcus could respond, disappearing into the crowd of tourists as if she had never existed. Marcus sat alone on the bench, her words settling into his mind, alongside the image of those patient eyes, the memory of that impossible slap, the growing certainty that his life had just divided into before and after. He looked back toward the guard. The man was still there, still standing, still staring straight ahead. But something had changed. Marcus could feel it. The guard knew he was still here, knew he was watching, knew he was waiting. The question was, what exactly was he waiting for? Part 3. The waiting ended approximately 3 hours later. Marcus had not moved from the bench. He had watched the guard change shifts, watched a new young man in the same uniform assume the same position with the same absolute focus. He had watched the crowd change composition as morning became afternoon, as families with small children gave way to school groups and then to couples on early dinner dates. He had watched the light change across the palace facade, golden stone deepening to amber as the sun began its slow descent toward the London skyline. He had also watched the men who had been watching him. They were good, very good. Marcus would not have noticed them at all if he had not spent 30 years learning to read the movement of human bodies in space. But he had spent 30 years learning exactly that, so he noticed. 2 men, first, then 3, then 4. They moved through the crowd with the casual ease of tourists, but they never quite left his vicinity. They never quite looked at him directly. They never quite did anything that would draw attention. But they were always there, always positioned where they could see him, always